Welcome back to another deep dive. We're really thrilled to have you joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here.
And, if you're new to the show, our core mission here is pretty straightforward but vital. We basically take a dense stack of sources, so articles, global reports, complex analyses, and we break them down so you can walk into any room and be the most well-informed person there.
Right. We do the heavy lifting so you don't have to.
Exactly. And today we are looking at a really fast-moving, highly volatile global situation, but we're examining it through a very specific and maybe unexpected lens.
Yeah, it's a very different angle than what you're seeing on the major news networks right now.
For sure. Let's just set the stage first with the facts on the ground. And this is drawn straight from our source material today, which is a detailed report from Al Jazeera.
Right, just the established timeline.
Yeah. So today is Wednesday, March 4, 2026. We are currently on the 5th day of this sweeping conflict in the Middle East. To quickly recap, the U.S. and Israel began attacking Iran on Saturday.
And those strikes have obviously continued.
They have, and according to Iranian state media reports, the death toll from those joint U.S. and Israeli attacks right now stands at 1,045.
It's a staggering number in such a short window.
It really is. And Iran has heavily retaliated, hitting targets in Israel, as well as striking U.S. military assets spread out across Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, and Cyprus.
Right, the sheer physical footprint of this conflict is massive. I mean, it's drawing in multiple nations and some of the world's largest military powers. But to truly understand the mechanics of this war, we really have to look beyond just the tactical movements.
And that is the specific focus of today's deep dive. We are not going to sit here and analyze the munitions being deployed or, the shifting borders.
We'll leave that to the military strategists.
Exactly. Based on this Al Jazeera reporting, we're focusing entirely on the rhetoric surrounding the violence. We're going to examine how and, probably more importantly, why U.S. and Israeli officials are aggressively framing this modern geopolitical conflict as a religious war.
Now, before we delve into the actual statements being made by these leaders, I need to jump in here and establish some really clear boundaries for you, the listener, regarding our discussion today.
Yeah, that's crucial. Go ahead.
We are exploring highly politically charged content. We'll be analyzing statements, profound beliefs, and some really sharp criticisms that originate from both left-wing and right-wing perspectives, as well as deeply rooted religious doctrines.
Right.
So neither of us are taking a side today. We are absolutely not endorsing any of the political viewpoints, military policies, or religious interpretations we're about to discuss. Our goal is strictly analytical. We're just acting as impartial guides to unpack the ideas of the reporting contained in the source material provided to us.
Perfectly said. And to give you a sense of the sheer gravity of what we're actually unpacking here, consider this scenario. What does it signify for the chain of command when modern military leaders start briefing their troops, not on satellite imagery or ground strategy, but on the Book of Revelation and the impending Armageddon?
It's a fundamental shift in how a war is prosecuted.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start by looking at the specific language echoing on the front lines right now, because the Al Jazeera report highlights some deeply concerning intelligence coming out of the U.S. military.
Yes, specifically gathered by a watchdog group.
Yes, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, or the MRFF. They're a nonprofit dedicated to upholding religious freedom for U.S. service members, and they've been receiving just a flood of alarming emails regarding what troops are being told about the very nature of this war.
And the details in those communications, they represent a profound shift from standard operational protocol. The report cites a claim from an unnamed non-commissioned officer who contacted the MRFF.
And what did that officer say?
This officer reported that a commander urged the leadership to tell their troops that this war with Iran is, quote, all part of God's divine plan. The commander allegedly made numerous citations straight out of the biblical book of Revelation.
Wow.
Yeah, speaking specifically about Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ to earth.
And there was an even more startling politically charged detail in that report regarding the former U.S. president, right?
Right. The non-commissioned officer claimed this commander told the unit that Donald Trump has been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth.
See, it's one thing to hear eschatological rhetoric, end times theology debated on some Sunday morning broadcast.
Yeah.
It is an entirely different reality when that language is used to brief troops who are holding live weapons in a combat zone. I mean, it shifts the entire psychological framework of the soldier.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
When a military objective is framed as a divine mandate, you're no longer just following orders from the Pentagon, you are participating in a cosmic event.
Exactly.
But as the source material points out, this theological statecraft isn't just confined to isolated military units, it's being broadcast from the highest podiums in U.S. politics.
Right, like the recent public statement from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He literally described Iranian leaders as religious fanatic lunatics pursuing nuclear ambitions.
And we're seeing identical rhetorical strategies coming from the Pentagon itself. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth held a news briefing just this past Monday.
And what did he say?
He stated that crazy regimes like Iran, hell-bent on prophetic Islamic delusions, cannot have nuclear weapons.
Prophetic Islamic delusions.
Yeah, and that phrase generated immediate and intense pushback. The Council on American Islamic Relations, or PAIR, which is a prominent Muslim civil rights organization, they strongly condemned the Pentagon's rhetoric.
They call it dangerous, right?
Dangerous and anti-Muslim. And the reason for that pushback requires us to look at the theology Hegseth is actually targeting there. Kara pointed out that Hegseth is likely referencing the Shia belief in the Mahdi.
Which is a messianic figure.
Exactly, the 12th Imam, who's prophesied to appear during the end times alongside Jesus to rid the world of evil. By dismissing this as a delusion, it's not merely a political insult directed at a foreign government. It's a direct attack on a core theological tenet held by millions of Shia Muslims worldwide.
So we have the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense deploying this heavily religiously loaded language. And then the article introduces comments from Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel.
Right, from his recent interview.
Yeah, with conservative commentator Tucker Carlson. They were discussing the territorial scope of Israel. And according to the report, Huckabee told Carlson it would be fine if Israel took essentially the entire Middle East.
And his reasoning for that.
His reasoning wasn't rooted in international law or defensive strategy. It was based on the belief that the land was promised to them in the Bible.
Now, the article does note that Huckabee added a caveat there, acknowledging that Israel wasn't actually seeking to conquer the entire Middle East. However, the justification he offered for that hypothetical scenario was entirely theological. He was leaning on biblical promises to legitimize modern geopolitical borders.
And that kind of territorial justification based on ancient texts, it isn't just happening in American conservative circles. We are seeing an identical rhetorical strategy coming from the very top of the Israeli government.
Yeah, the Al Jazeera report focuses heavily on statements made this past Sunday by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
He directly invoked the Torah, didn't he?
He did. He drew a comparison between Iran and an ancient biblical enemy known as the Amalekites. Quoting the Torah portion, Netanyahu stated, "Remember what Amalek did to you? We remember and we act."
To understand the weight of that statement, we really have to understand what Amalek represents in Jewish tradition. Because the Amalekites are not just viewed as an opposing army. They are the ultimate archetype of pure, irredeemable evil.
Right.
The biblical narrative is terrifying in its totality. The story claims that God commanded the Israelites to entirely wipe out this pagan nation that had ambushed them in the desert, meaning a divine mandate to eradicate every man, woman, child, and animal. It's a narrative of total, uncompromising destruction.
And unsurprisingly, Cairo issued a sharp condemnation of Netanyahu's statement. They expressed deep disturbance over this holy war rhetoric, criticizing the prime minister for utilizing the story of Amalek to essentially justify what they described as Israel's mass murder of civilians in Iran.
And Kara also observed that Netanyahu previously deployed this exact same Amalek analogy to refer to Palestinians during the war in Gaza.
Yes, exactly.
So, what does this all mean? We have the most advanced, high-tech militaries on the planet, equipped with precision-guided munitions and satellite intelligence, and yet their leaders are relying on ancient biblical language, talking about end times, prophecies, and pure evil. Why?
What's fascinating here is how the academic experts analyze the mechanics of this disconnect. The Al Jazeera article cites two professors who dissect why leaders reach for this specific vocabulary: Jolyon Mitchell from Durham University and Ibrahim Abu Sharif from Northwestern University in Qatar.
Okay.
Professor Abu Sharif outlines three distinct overlapping pillars that explain why leaders frame modern wars in ancient terms.
Let's walk through those three pillars because they really illuminate the strategy behind the words. The first pillar Abu Sharif identifies is domestic mobilization.
Right. Domestic mobilization is the art of rallying your own populace. It's not just about getting votes. It's about bypassing the logical, critical part of a voter's brain.
How so?
Well, when a leader frames a war as a biblical prophecy, it makes questioning the war feel akin to questioning God. That is a deeply effective, almost impenetrable political shield. It leverages deep-seated theological beliefs to secure unwavering political support.
The article actually provides a vivid example of this happening right now in the U.S. with Christian Zionist pastor John Hagee. A video of his has been circulating widely on social media.
Oh, right, this sermon.
Yeah, a sermon promoting the U.S. assault on Iran. An assault that a social media post in the article dramatically refers to as Operation Epic Fury. Hagee delivers a very specific modern prophecy. He predicts that Russia, Turkey, what's left of Iran, and groups of Islamics will march into Israel only for God to crush the adversaries of Israel.
And Abu Sharif explains that rhetoric like Hagee's is highly calculated. In the U.S., terms like Christian Zionist referred to Christians who believe that the modern state of Israel is a manifestation of biblical prophecy and a prerequisite for the second coming of Christ.
So it's a built-in audience.
Exactly. When military or political leaders reference the book of Revelation or biblical enemies, they're activating a cultural script that is already deeply embedded in American political theology. They're pressing a psychological button that has been wired into millions of voters for decades.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. Activating a cultural script. It transforms a complex foreign policy decision into a familiar Sunday school lesson.
Precisely.
And that leads to the second pillar Abu Sharif outlines, which is civilizational framing. This is the deliberate construction of a stark us versus them dichotomy.
Civilizational framing casts the war not as a dispute over resources or sea lanes or regional hegemony. It casts it as a fundamental clash between entire ways of life, between light and dark, civilization and barbarism. Abu Sharif makes the point that wars are actually notoriously difficult to justify to the general public using technical strategic language. If a politician gives a speech about adjusting the balance of power in the Persian Gulf, the public just tunes out.
But if you cast the conflict as a struggle against religious fanatic lunatics or prophetic Islamic delusions, like we heard from Rubio and Hegseth, you transform a highly complicated regional confrontation into a simple moral drama.
Exactly.
It paints the world in black and white, making it incredibly easy for an ordinary audience to grasp who the good guys and bad guys are.
And that leads directly into Abu Sharif's third pillar, which focuses on how this operates within Israel specifically. He calls this strategic narrative construction.
Okay, break that down for us.
We need to give this pillar equal weight because it fundamentally drives Israeli domestic policy. Israeli leadership has a long history of utilizing biblical reference as political language. By deploying this vocabulary, they situate a contemporary modern-day conflict, like a dispute over nuclear enrichment or border security, within a millennia-long globalized historical narrative of Jewish survival.
So by connecting a modern war to ancient survival, Israeli leaders signal to their citizens that the stakes of the conflict are absolutely existential.
Exact.
If the narrative is that Iran is the modern Amalek, then any international pressure for a ceasefire or diplomatic compromise isn't just a political setback, it's framed as a threat to the very survival of the Jewish people.
That's the core of it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because there is a massive dangerous friction between this eschatological rhetoric we're analyzing and the actual reality on the ground.
Abu Sharif makes a vital distinction that we really must keep in focus here. The objectives of this war, securing borders, neutralizing nuclear capabilities, projecting regional power, are strictly geopolitical.
Right, they're political goals.
But the fuel being used to sustain public support for those objectives is entirely theological. By cloaking the conflict in sacred imagery, leaders are successfully moralizing the war to energize their base.
Playing with that kind of sacred fuel comes with immense risks, though. This is where Professor Jolyon Mitchell from Durham University issues a stark warning in the article. He points out the inherent danger when both sides of a conflict believe they have God enlisted in their violence.
When you convince your population that the enemy is a literal agent of pure evil, or that they are lunatics standing in the way of a divine plan, the enemy ceases to be a human adversary. They become utterly demonized and dehumanized.
And the fallout from that.
The long-term trap here is severe. Once a leader casts a war in morally absolute sacred language, political compromise becomes almost impossible. The domestic audience has been primed to expect a total divine victory. You cannot sign a peace treaty with the devil. This raises the expectations so high that it severely paralyzes diplomacy, making the eventual goal of building peace after the conflict exponentially harder.
I mean, it is incredibly difficult to sit across a negotiating table from someone you have publicly declared an enemy of God.
Right.
And we've seen the disastrous potential of this dynamic play out before in recent American history. The Al Jazeera article brings up a highly pertinent historical parallel regarding the danger of deploying religious words in secular
Yeah,
conflicts.
going back to 2001.
Exactly. The report looks back to the immediate aftermath of the September 11 attacks. On September 16, 2001, President George W. Bush was speaking about the newly declared war on terrorism, and he referred to it as a crusade. He stated, "This crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while."
To a modern domestic ear in the U.S., the word crusade might just sound like a passionate, determined campaign for a righteous cause. But globally and historically, that word carries tremendous violent weight.
Heavy historical baggage.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Crusades were a specific series of religiously framed wars of conquest. Taking place largely between the 11th and 13th centuries, they involved the Christian papacy waging war against Muslim rulers for control of territory in the Middle East.
So when the President of the United States used that specific word to describe impending military action in the Middle East, he unintentionally invoked centuries of religious bloodshed and territorial conquest. The White House realized the gravity of that mistake almost instantly.
The panic was immediate behind the scenes. The article notes that the White House had to quickly walk back that word, issuing clarifications to distance President Bush from the term crusade. They had to explicitly reassure the global community that the United States was not waging a holy war against Muslims.
It's a perfect, enduring example of how a single piece of sacred vocabulary can drastically shift the global perception of a conflict, and why the deliberate weaponization of this language today is so alarming to these academic observers.
It really shows how incredibly powerful these cultural scripts are.
So, to synthesize what we have covered today, alongside the very real physical conflict involving airstrikes, military assets, and tragically mounting civilian death tolls, there is a parallel, deeply intentional rhetorical war taking place.
Absolutely.
Leaders from both the United States and Israel are actively utilizing biblical prophecies, end times imagery, and the concept of holy war to bypass logical policy debate. They are using theology as fuel to rally their domestic bases, simplifying complex geopolitics into a binary of good versus evil, and signaling that the stakes are nothing short of existential.
And while that cognitive bypass might work brilliantly as a short-term strategy to drum up domestic support and silence political opposition, the academic consensus warns that this moralizing of violence runs the severe risk of permanently dehumanizing the opposition.
It paints them into a corner.
It backs leaders into a theological corner, where compromise is viewed as treason, making future diplomatic peace nearly impossible to achieve.
My takeaway for you, the listener, as you navigate the news in the coming days, is this. The next time you hear a political or military leader speak about an international conflict, listen past the immediate policy or the troop movements. Pay very close attention to the vocabulary they're choosing. Ask yourself what underlying cultural and religious scripts they're trying to activate in your mind in order to secure your unwavering support.
This raises an important question, one that expands on the warnings from our academic sources today. If leaders successfully convince their domestic populations that a specific, devastating conflict is actually an unavoidable, divinely preordained step toward the end times, how does that permanently alter the way the international community approaches diplomacy? If the outcome of a war is supposedly already written in a holy text, is there any room left at all for human peacemaking?
That is a profound thought to leave you with, and absolutely something to mull over as you watch these global events continue to unfold. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your dedication to looking beneath the surface of the headlines. Keep questioning the narratives you encounter, and we will catch you next time.